In the previous example, we learned how to find the midpoint of a line segment whenever we're given 2 endpoints of that line segment. Just as a recap, we said if we're given 2 endpoints on a line segment, say these are the endpoints, x1, y1, x2, y2. We wanted to find the midpoint, which is that middle value point somewhere around here. And we determined that we could find that middle point by using the midpoint formula, which we said was x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And we said we could actually determine the midpoint using this formula. Well, in this section, we want to show some problems that are a variation of the problems that we did in the last section. In the last section,